going to take a walk to the disturbing dark side of Darwin in this special edition of Genesis Week. Welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the Origins controversy, made possible by the supporters of CORE Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education, and now carried on the Christianima Network, christianima.com, Christian cinema at its finest. Excellence in Pirate Broadcasting, we continue to bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and giving glory to our Creator while doing it. We believe God gave you an intelligently designed brain in order for you to use it. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, you can just punch in Wazooloo.com or GenesisWeek.com and you can find us. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get extras like Prevo Rants and full interviews with our guests. I'm your host, Ian Juby. We're going to depart from our standard show format today. In fact, we will depart from our standard format for two special episodes. We're going to venture into areas which I know that my evolutionary friends do not like to venture into. And to be honest, I do not like to discuss the things we are about to discuss either. But it is sadly important. The anti-creationists will vehemently try to deny the connections we are about to reveal. And in fact, they will attempt to twist around these dark issues in a convoluted attempt to blame the Christians and creationists. We are going to visit the dark side of Darwinism. We will reveal and examine the negative impact this theory has on everything from social issues to proper medical and scientific research. Now, I want to be very clear to my evolutionary friends. I am not saying that believing in evolution makes one evil. On the contrary, it is the human heart which is inherently evil, not a person's particular worldview. Now, there have been many atrocities carried out in the name of Christ, for example. That has nothing to do with whether or not the Christian faith is righteous or correct. People will use any excuse at hand to justify wicked deeds. But as Richard Weaver once said, ideas have consequences. So just what are the consequences of Darwin's idea? What are the consequences of creationary and Christian ideas? If a person goes on a shooting rampage and claims that Jesus Christ told them to do it, they would find difficulty justifying their claim, seeing as how Christ certainly did not lead with such an example, and Jesus even taught to turn the other cheek when someone strikes you. However, if evolution and survival of the fittest is true, then such a person can easily justify their actions. After all, it is only survival of the fittest. We are only animals, and whether or not an animal uses tooth and claw to kill another animal, or if that animal uses a gun to kill, what difference does it make? Within the Darwinian paradigm, how is mass murder then wrong? Your worldview has consequences. The truth about creation and evolution has consequences. Now, if you think my connection is a stretch, then you should be reminded or informed of precisely what mass murderers have said. Eric Harris and Derek Klebold went on a shooting rampage at Columbine High School in 1999. Eric was wearing a shirt with big bold letters spelling out the motto of Darwin: natural selection. On his website, he had written the words, "You know what I love? Natural selection. It's the best thing that ever happened to the earth." And getting rid of all the stupid and weak organisms. In 2007, Pekka-Erik Ovinen went on a shooting rampage at a high school in Finland. Again, he was quite clear about his reasoning on his YouTube channel and various blogs, with unambiguous language referring to evolutionism and its conclusions. Life is just a coincidence, result of long process of evolution and many several factors, causes and effects. Evolution is both a theory and a fact. Creationism is neither one. Today, the process of natural selection is totally misguided. Modern human race has not only betrayed its ancestors, but the future generations too. It's time to put natural selection and survival of the fittest back on track. I am prepared to fight and die for my cause. I, as a natural selector, will eliminate all who I see unfit, disgraces of the human race, and failures of natural selection. And if evolution is a fact and true, you would be hard-pressed to argue with their reasoning, because your arguments would be without foundation. These are the ultimate conclusions of the process of evolution. The notorious mass murderer and cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer said in an interview with Dateline NBC, "If a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges?" That's how I thought anyway. I always believed the theory of evolution as truth, that we all just came from slime. When you've died, that was it. There was nothing. And I've since come to believe that the Lord Jesus Christ is truly God, and I believe that I, as well as everyone else, will be accountable to him. But mass murderers aside, an evolutionary worldview probably affects you personally in ways you did not even comprehend. To shed light on this disturbingly dark area, I am privileged to have several guests join me today. Joseph Vaillancourt is a licensed minister with the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, a developmental service worker working with Christian Horizons, and the founder of Enable Faith Ministries in Toronto, a ministry reaching out to those of the disabled community to foster their involvement within the Christian community and in ministry. He joins me via Skype from Toronto. Dr. Jerry Bergman's curriculum vitae would be far too long to list here, but he has 9 degrees in everything from biology to psychology. 2 of those degrees are a PhD. He is the author of the book The Dark Side of Darwin and is himself a former atheist, now turned young earth creationist and Christian. He has taught multiple disciplines at the college level and joins me by telephone from Ohio. Paul Gosselin is an independent researcher specializing in ideologies, belief systems, and religion, and holds a master's degree in social anthropology. He is author of the 2-volume series that I think was just so excellently entitled, Flight from the Absolute. He joins us via Skype from Quebec City. Joseph, I'd like to start with you. What is eugenics?
Eugenics is the self-direction of human evolution. The goal is to remove unwanted genetic information in order to create a more perfect race, if you will. It's a very old idea. Plato talked about it in his Republic, as well as in the laws of Plato. There's the idea of a superior race is there. Plato was quite dismayed at the fact that they had to create laws for those they deemed to be the superior race, which would be usually the people who belonged to his community, who saw themselves as children of the gods. So the children of the gods, who are supposed to be the perfect race, shouldn't have to have laws. So he was kind of dismayed about that. They also had a concept of physiognomics. It's the study of bodily or outer characteristics to discover inner characteristics of temperament and character. Basically, according to Amos Young, whose definition I'm using here, they looked at human beings, and based on where they lived in the world, what race they were, how they looked, whether they were short, tall, blind, deaf, or if they had a disfigurement, it was supposed to symbolize some sort of character or spiritual problem in their lives. Some of this still kind of lingers, And you see that a lot in Darwinism, and and people who are influenced by Darwinism will have that, even though they may not realize that this is where it's actually coming from. For example, Oscar Bishop, or Reverend Tommy Douglas, who most Canadians would know, is the founder of our universal healthcare system. They were heavy eugenics people, and Oscar Bishop, for example, he won a contest in 1928. He won a contest that was sponsored by the Eugenics Society in the United States. They did these every year, and they got published in the eugenics magazines. And Oscar Bishop, he actually said that, this is from his sermon that was in the contest, he said, "Even religion may preach an easy and unworthy doctrine of forgiveness to the detriment of the wholesome biological truth. Environmental gain will become permanent only when stabilized on a eugenics foundation." So not even a biblical foundation was his interest. He was heavily involved with the unions, and some of the groups he was involved with were known to be violent. Although his church didn't always approve, his church in Chicago was Plymouth Presbyterian, and he knew they didn't always support him, but he kept going on what he believed was right. They believed in socialized medicine, socialized Christianity, or Christian socialism, if you will. And again, it was the idea that only those who were without blemish, those who fit the cookie cutter, should be allowed to continue. They advocated with the eugenics people, for laws that would prevent unwanted people from reproducing through sterilization. The vasectomy, for example, was developed with this in mind. They perfected it while experimenting on people with disabilities. One of the more disturbing pieces of evidence that I discovered in my research had to do with a postcard that the government in Louisiana sent out to families, telling them if they had epilepsy, that they should report to the prisons, or basically they would end up in jail because it was apparently a crime to have a disability. They didn't want people who were different to be in public. The assumption was if you had a disability of any kind, or a blemish of any kind, or if you did not belong to the right group of people, you were more likely to break the laws. It kind of sounds like Plato's laws, right? And the whole gods thing, children of the gods can do no wrong, but everyone else can. They even stratify crime. So the more evolved you were, the more sophisticated your crimes would be. The less evolved, the more petty. And they even among those that they deemed to be evolved, they stratified it, and of course they were always at the top. We know that in World War II, eugenics was used in the final solution. And 250,000 people with Down syndrome were murdered by Hitler's regime, and of course millions of Jews, all because of Hitler's desire of a perfect race. And these people, Darwinism through eugenics influenced social policy, medicine, our concept of beauty. It was the Presbyterians. They started baby contests and different to look for what was scientifically beautiful.
Right. And Francis Galton, the father of eugenics and Charles Darwin's cousin, was pretty clear about the connection with evolutionism in his biography. Quote, "The publication in 1859 of The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin made a marked epoch in my own mental development, as it did in that of human thought generally. Its effect was to demolish a multitude of dogmatic barriers by a single stroke, and to arouse a spirit of rebellion against all ancient authorities whose positive and unauthenticated statements were contradicted by modern science," end quote. Science falsely so called, I might add. Now, the connection is pretty apparent. But eugenics, that's just a thing of the past, is it not? I mean, we're in the modern age now.
I would like to say that it is, but we actually know that it's not. Sun News, for example, was reporting on the United Nations and the Agenda 21, which is sustainable development, which it comes again, according to Sun News, comes out of socialism, European socialism, if you will. And what I've read of it, and I have a lot more work to do in this area, but it seems to me, again, it's about controlling population and kind of limiting where people can live and freedoms. And in a lot of eugenics rules, it sounds a lot like the eugenics people of the last century. They too wanted everything to be controlled by a few, and they control as much of our lives as possible in order to create perfect race. I guess they take iron sharpens iron a little seriously. But it's for me, the influence it had on the church is disturbing, because the church changed the way it did things, in my opinion. Oscar Bishop and Tommy Douglas were not the only thinkers of the day. I mean, they changed the way we do healthcare. They changed the way we do schooling to fit this. Everything from even the Roman Catholics had their own internal debate. So they're the largest Christian church in the world, per se. Joseph Meyer, in the Journal of Heredity, in 1934, for example, was talked about as supporting eugenics. According to the journal, it says his tentative conclusions was that selective sterilization for eugenics purposes, properly administered, was entirely in accord with the traditions, principles of Roman Catholic religion. And that was on page 23 of the journal. But even the Pope in 1932 kind of rescinded it, but not completely. He allowed eugenics for therapy reasons only. Doesn't that kind of sound like the abortions debate today?
Mm-hmm. Dr. Bergman, you married Darwinian evolution with the Jewish Holocaust, where many have desperately tried to divorce them. Now, I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I thought your most recent book title says it all. Hitler and the Darwinian Worldview, How the Nazi Eugenic Crusade for a Superior Race Caused the Greatest Holocaust in World History. What do you mean in your title that the Darwinian worldview was connected with eugenics and the Holocaust?
Well, mainly in Nazi Germany and other places, several, in fact, the communist nations, many of them as well. The motivation for the Jewish Holocaust, and not just the Jewish Holocaust, I should mention, but also the Holocaust against other groups, such as Gypsies, Slavics, and Slavics includes Russians and Poles, and other groups. So it was quite beyond the Jews. But the reason they were motivated to destroy or at least reduce the number of these races was based on Darwin. And this is not just my idea, but this has been well documented. In fact, in my book, Hitler and the Darwinian Worldview, I have almost 1,000 references. But an excellent film on this is called Science and the Swastika. It's 4 hours long, so I'll warn you, but extremely well done. I could not have done a better job myself. And they interview many of the leading scholars in this area. Also, the American United States Holocaust Memorial Museum published a book called Deadly Medicine, Creating the Master Race, which unequivocally documents the major motivation behind the Nazi movement, as well as Hitler himself, was to, well, as they say, create a master race. And to do that, they relied heavily upon Darwin and Darwin ideas, as, of course, formulated by his cousin, Galton.
Okay. Well, we're going to pause there for just a moment as we need to take a commercial break. Stick around. We're going to carry on this discussion in just a minute. This show is sponsored in part by Canada's first permanent creation museum in the heart of Alberta's dinosaur beds, the Big Valley Creation Science Museum at bvcsm.com. And by Genesis Park, where you can pre-order your own beautiful hard-covered copy of the Chronicles of Dinosauria, the history and mystery of dinosaurs and man. What does the Bible say about aliens? Is there life on other planets? What can science tell us about the possibility of aliens? Ian Juby gives answers to these and many more questions in this fascinating and highly disturbing subject. Looking analytically at the subject, complete with the testimonies of people who claim to have been abducted by aliens. The answers will probably surprise you. In this 1.5-hour lecture, Ian shows that the alleged aliens are a problem and that Jesus is the solution. Order online today at Ian's bookstore. Welcome back to Genesis Week. Just before our commercial break, we were talking about eugenics with Joseph Vaillancourt from Enable Faith Ministries, Dr. Jerry Bergman, and Paul Gosselin. Paul, I'd like to pick things back up with you. You're a social anthropologist. We were discussing the social repercussions of Darwinian evolutionism. One defensive response from evolutionists is that early 20th century eugenics and the Nazi Holocaust were in fact abuses of Darwinism. What do you think about that?
Okay. Now, the eugenics and the Holocaust in particular caused a huge marketing crisis for Darwinists in the 20th century.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, basically because these were attempts by the Western elites to actually apply Darwinism to society. So, and of course, it went rather wrong. Now, and this caused a huge cultural shock. Mm-hmm. And now, one of the strategies that Darwinists had was to cut this link, to break this link, and so that people wouldn't figure things out. Now, this is one of the reasons why you get ridiculous statements such as those made by Richard Dawkins. Did an interview on Australian Broadcasting Corporation a few years ago in 2000, and he said there have been in the past attempts to base morality on religion, on evolution. I don't want to have anything to do with that. The kind of world that a Darwinian, going back to the survival of the fittest now and nature red in tooth and claw, I think nature really is red in tooth and claw. But I think if you look at the wild nature, the way the wild nature is out there in the bush, in the prairie, it's extremely ruthless, extremely unpleasant. It's exactly the kind of world that I would not wish to live in. The kind of politics that is based upon Darwinism, for me, would be bad politics. It would be immoral. Putting it another way, I'm a passionate Darwinian when it comes to science, when it comes to explaining the world, but I'm a passionate anti-Darwinian when it comes to morality and politics. Now, that is rather astounding, and okay, but it's rather typical of evolutionists after World War II.
Right.
But you would never have seen any evolutionists before World War II saying anything like that. They thought that the idea of applying evolution to real societies would be just the normal thing to do. Now, the abuse of our argument. Now, if you look at evolution as an origins myth, which I do in Flight from the Absolute Volume 2, which is coming out this year, this exposes some rather interesting issues. Most religions have a sacred text, which is used by the believers as a basis for standards for behavior and beliefs. So it allows people to distinguish between orthodoxy and heresy. Now, with the Christians, this is the text. The sacred text is, of course, the Bible. With Muslims, you have the Quran. With Mormons, you have the writings of Joseph Smith. But the problem is that when it comes to Darwinism, there is no agreed-upon sacred text.
Right.
Of course, you have Darwin's origin itself. But okay, this is basically, it has symbolic value for Darwinists, but no one reads it, except perhaps maybe a few Darwin biographers, but nobody else reads it. It's not something considered current or really. So there is no sacred text expressly telling Darwinists how they should apply or not Darwin's views. So basically, what this means, when Darwinists are making loud noises about such and such a Darwinist that has in the past has abused Darwin, they're making entirely bogus and empty claims. They have no basis at all for excommunicating anybody that's applied Darwinism. So the real issue is that these abusers have provoked a marketing crisis. So it's a marketing issue. It's not there's no basis for making any claims about abuses of Darwin.
Now, it's interesting that we're all discussing this week, as I had a friend make this poster that was so perfect and to the very point we're making. Darwinism. Everyone supports the theory, but complains about the practice. It's true. And thank you to Simon Wellington for this timely poster. Now, for many viewers, this program will be the first time they've ever heard of eugenics. But it wasn't happening in some far-off, distant land like Germany and Russia, but right here in North America. Joseph, you were the one who called the Buck versus Bell case to my attention. This was a U.S. Supreme Court case over forced sterilization performed on Americans in California because of the eugenics movement. And the Supreme Court concluded that it was legal for the state to sterilize people. Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said it was, quote, to prevent society from being swamped with incompetence, end quote. Such statements are just screaming for a rejoinder, but I'll refrain for now and simply point out that the Supreme Court decision still stands today. It's never been rescinded. Just the past couple of weeks, there has been multiple stories in the news about compensation for those sterilized in the eugenics movement. Washington Post, January 30th, Virginia eugenics victims would receive compensation for sterilization under bill. LifeSiteNews.com, January 31st, eugenics compensation bill reintroduced in North Carolina. All in all, there were some 33 states that participated in eugenics, forced sterilization being the predominant action. Now, we're out of time here, but we're going to continue this discussion next week. And Joe, I want to start next week's show with you and the Buck versus Bell case. So thank you, gentlemen, for being on the show today. I know the viewers will appreciate this very much, so thank you. You can visit Joseph's Facebook page for Enable Faith Ministry at facebook.com/Enable Faith Ministry. You can get a copy of Paul's thick and excellent book, Flight from the Absolute, Volume 1, from Amazon.com, and Volume 2 is due out this summer. And Dr. Bergman has several books related to the subject which are available on Amazon, such as The Dark Side of Darwin, exploring Darwin's troubled mind, as well as his highly disturbing and enlightening Hitler and the Darwinian Worldview, where he methodically documents how Darwinian evolution influenced the atrocities of the Holocaust. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Ian Juby, signing off for now. You can send in your comments, questions, and feedback to us in a number of ways. You can email us at comments@genesisweek.com or send us a tweet at GenesisWeek, or you can go to genesisweek.com, which is our YouTube channel, or you can leave a comment on our Facebook page at Genesis Week TV. Remember those words of warning from our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. We'll see you next week.
We need your support to keep this program on the air. Please pray for us. And if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, K2K2P4. While we cannot offer tax-deductible receipts outside of Canada, donors wishing to financially support the program could do so online at ianjuby.org/donations.html. And thank you for your support. We need your support to keep this program on the air. Please pray for us. And if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, K2K2P4. While we cannot offer tax-deductible receipts outside of Canada, donors wishing to financially support the program could do so online at ianjuby.org/donations.html. And thank you for your support.